Oh man. All right, well, it looks like we're leveling out with participants. So good evening and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for our virtual event, Climbing Mount Hood, Southside Routes and more. I'm Liz Craig with the Mountain Shop, and tonight we are joined by Matt Zavortink and Micah Hoover, who both are heavily involved in PMR, as well as avid climbers of Mount Hood. If you're ever up there on a nice day climbing, or even a not so nice day climbing, it's likely you'll probably find these guys roaming around on the upper flanks of the mountain. And collectively, I would guess that they've probably climbed the majority of known routes. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but from my perspective, it seems like you guys have climbed most of the known routes, or at least recognized routes. So tonight they're going to spend the first hour discussing what's involved in getting to the top via some of the traditional routes on the south side from Timberline, whether that be Old Chute or Pearly Gates. And then the second hour, they'll transition to some lesser climbed routes and hopefully inspire you guys to dig deeper into your mountaineering careers, learn some new skills, and explore some of the other sides of the mountain. And with that, I'll pass things over to Micah and Matt. Welcome, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. Hey, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and hop right into the presentation here. I'll give my screen a minute to come up. And so the way this is going to work is I'm going to be doing the presentation part of the south side. And in the background, Matt's going to be monitoring the chat and also popping in and commenting on some of the stuff as we're talking through it. If you do have questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to try and address them as we go. For the most part, we might respond to you in the chat window. We might just start talking about it if it's relevant to the slide that we have up at the moment. And then we're going to flip. We're going to take a short intermission when we get done with the south side portion of it, and we're going to go ahead and go into the other routes portion. The Matt's going to take over there, and I'll be handling some more of the chat, and Liz will be helping us out too. So again, feel free to chime in with questions at any point. We'll do our best, and here we go. So first off, a little bit about us, PMR. We're a nonprofit volunteer organization. We serve the high alpine areas in Mount Hood, and sometimes we get called to other areas as well. Sorry, get that out of there. Sometimes we get called out to other areas as well, Mount Adams, Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier. We are now in a partnership with the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, so we will be dispatched by them. You can't reach us directly. We can't talk to you even if we wanted to. So we are contacted by the sheriff, who is usually given the information by 911. And we're also part of the Mountain Rescue Organization, which is a compilation of SAR groups in North America that specialize in these type of environments. So Mount Hood, that's what we're here talking about tonight. It's our home turf, elevation of 11,200 feet. It's been climbed for a long, long time. First ascent back in 1857. Most climbed mountain in the world, mostly due to its proximity to the major metropolitan areas of Portland, Seattle, ease of access, coming straight up from Timberline Lodge and the high elevation you can start with. Second most in the world, only behind Mount Fuji. Sees thousands, tens of thousands of some attempts every year. I don't know how accurate that 20,000 number is, but it's pretty close to that. Most of the attempts are up the south side routes, which is primarily what we're going to talk about tonight, and we're going to go into a lot more detail those in a little bit. Again, there's routes all over the mountain, but yeah, we're focusing here on the south side. So the first thing that's usually involved with most climbs is permitting, and whether you're going down to Mount Whitney or the Enchantments, there's a whole host of permitting systems that the Forest Service use to regulate access. Mount Hood is pretty lucky in that aspect. It's a free climbing permit that you can self-issue at the trailhead year-round. These are available in the Timberline Lodge, in the climbing register, which is still open now due to COVID. It should be restocked with these permits on a regular basis. So there's instructions there on how to fill these out. You keep one on your person, drop the other one in the box there, and that's it. Pretty simple, no reservations required. The only other pay permit that is required is to park at Timberline Lodge. It is a Oregon snow park, so if you want to park between November 1st and April 30th, you do need a snow park pass. So the Southside route, this is going to start from Timberline Lodge. This is the main approach up the south side of the mountain. So if you're at the lodge, you're looking up the mountain, this is what we're talking about here. It's typically climbed in November to June. It is climbed year round. It's not recommended in those other seasons due to a variety of hazards that we're going to talk about later. What does it look like as far as, how dangerous is it? How technical is it? Again, we're going into a lot more detail, but it's usually about 20 to 45 degrees of steep consolidated snow. Depending on the season, especially earlier, November, January, there could be short sections of more vertical ice climbing near the summit. But at this time of year and later on, those portions have usually deteriorated to the point where it's just a steep snowshoe. How long does it take? This is a great question, and the answer is, like a lot of things, it depends. It depends on, the party, it depends on your fitness, it depends on your goal, but 6 to 8 hours is a good benchmark. There's going to be a lot of parties that can do it faster, and there's going to be parties that can do it slower. We'll talk about timing a little bit more in depth in a minute here. The hike itself is going to look like 5,200 feet of elevation gain over 3.5 miles. Now, there isn't a lot of hikes that can compare to that kind of gain or that steepness. And the photo on the right here, a lot of these photos we're going to use, and we'll talk about it more later, are coming out of the Mount Hood Climbing Guidebook. So when you see these annotated pictures, we're borrowing from those. Highly recommend, if you're interested in this route or some of the other routes, to get your hand on a copy of this book, also readily available at the Mountain Shop. So we'll drop back for a second, because the first part of the route here, as you can see, it starts at Timberline Lodge, which is just out of the range of the picture here at the bottom, and it's going to follow this green line. Sorry, it's going to follow this green line up the south side and essentially follow the boundary of the Timberline Ski Resort. It's going to go just on the climber's right side of the Palmer Snowfield, and the top of the Palmer Snowfield is typically a great spot for people to stop, rest, grab some snacks, things like that. It's kind of a halfway point. From there, there's you see a couple different options that are branching out. The southwest approach, the West Crater Rim approach. We're going to ignore those for now, and we're only focused on the main one, which is the south side approach, and that's going to continue up here to that slot 5. And I'm going to clear out. So continuing on from the last slide, we're coming up out of the slot 5, and you're going to see it's approaching the area called Triangle Moraine. And next it's going up to the area called Devil's Kitchen. So again, Devil's Kitchen is a big, wide open, flat space where a lot of people like to take breaks and rest. And we're going to talk a little bit more about timing coming up to here later. From then, it starts to get steeper at this point, and you're going to ascend up the side of the Hog's Back to kind of a decision point. And this is where the two main variations of the route split off. And you can either ascend up the Pearly Gates, which is on the right side, or the Old Chute, which is labeled as the number 5 alternate on the left side. Old Chute is typically a little bit less steep and typically doesn't involve any sort of ice climbing. It's just a steep snow slope up to the summit. The Pearly Gates, there's 2 variations. There's a left variation and a right variation. Depending on the conditions, what type of climbing you find in there changes a lot throughout the course of the year, but generally it's going to be the steepest section of the snow out of any of the climbing you're going to see, and potentially a little bit of ice climbing. And then after that sort of section, there's just another final snowfield until you get up to the summit ridge. So right now, I think is a good place. Do we have any questions relating to the routes itself? Okay, seems like we got it all handled. So this is a picture, if we take a step back to the last slide, if you were standing right in this area on the Hog's Back looking up, that's where this photo was taken from. And so this is the Hog's Back, and this is right where that route typically splits, and you have the option of continuing up to the left by the old chute, or again, up into the pearly gates here where it splits on the right. Now, one thing we like to highlight is, especially later in the season, when we're talking March, April, we tend to advise people to avoid what we would call the higher traverse out to the old chute. And you can see that's where these people are right now, simply because the danger due to the falling ice and rime from these rime formations up above here, that danger starts to grow later in the season as things get warmer and warmer. And if a chunk of this were to break off, it's moving at a pretty fast pace and you don't have any time to react. What we would recommend is taking the traverse from the hog's back down across the slope at the bottom of the old chute here, and then coming more of a straight direct path up to the side. You really don't lose any elevation. It seems like you do, but it works out that it's pretty straightforward. And again, it protects you from the hazard of ice and falling rime up here. And again, the pearly gates, you can see there's a split right here. The left gate kind of comes up and around a corner. That's hard to see. And the right gate goes right up into this. And again, both of those will lead you up into that summit ridge. Just a little bit better idea of what that steeper section of the pearly gates may look like. Again, earlier in the season, as you see on the right here, you can see it's pretty vertical. It's a short step, maybe a body length, maybe 2 body lengths. And again, this does require some technical ice experience to be able to safely navigate. Later in the season, as it starts to get compacted out, this is going to turn more into a steep snow slope. And it's going to look a little bit more like this. It's easier to walk through and pretty well managed with a single ice axe and good technique. So again, on the left here, steep snow, and from the right, again, to give you a better idea of perspective, that last picture we were looking at when you were looking up at the roots was taken from this area down here on top of the hog's back, and this picture is taken from inside of that, inside of the pearly gates. So I just saw a question real quick about avalanche danger, and we're going to go into that in a little bit. Inside in the climbing routes themselves in this section, generally not. There are some dangers that are going to increase due to sunshine typically, but again, we'll circle back to that in a minute. So another overview, this is now looking down the old chute, not the pearly gates. It looks similar. But yeah, sometimes they can be hard to tell the difference of. But yeah, this is from the old chute. That reference point that we're using earlier where the photos was taken is now over here, a little bit more on the left. And again, the old chute, it's a lot wider. It doesn't get as tight as the pearly gates was. And typically, if people are looking to ski out, then they'll be coming out of the old chute. This is a photo from later in the season, just to give you an idea of how things start to look as it gets melted out. You can see a couple things right here that are potentially hazardous, and we're going to circle around to the hazards later. But we want to draw attention to all these runnels that are coming down off of the rime formations and the rock formations up here. When we were talking earlier about that high traverse, you can see how that high traverse going right here is pretty close to where all that rock and rime would be falling off. And we really do caution people against going up that high, and prefer again to traverse across the bottom and take a more direct, straight up approach here. As you can see, you don't have those large rock towers above you. So now we're going to start to get into gear and layering systems and things of that nature. So if you have any questions on gear, just bear with me for a second because we're going to get through a lot of it here. So first thing is the technical gear. That's the stuff that sets this aside from your other day hikes or winter hikes that you might do. So you absolutely need an ice axe, helmet, and crampons. Now, if you don't have these, that's fine. You can rent them from the mountain shop, and they're going to be happy to fit them to you. Make sure you have the right size, make sure you have the right boots to go with those crampons, make sure you have, an ice axe that's a good length for you. If you have this stuff, then absolutely use your own, or if you have someone you can borrow it from too, that's fine. But again, you want to make sure that particularly your crampons are well fitted to you. a danger that I've personally experienced myself on my first Mount Hood climb was my crampons weren't well fitted to my boots, and as I was descending, it started to fall off, and it put me in a really bad situation. So this is something to pay a lot of attention to. Helmet, we do recommend a lightweight climbing helmet that's approved from impacts from the top. There are other helmets, some ski helmets are also rated for this. However, they're really heavy and they're really warm, and it might seem cold in the morning when you're starting out, but later in the day, as it gets to 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning and you're out in full sun, it gets really, really hot, and you don't want to be wearing that hot, heavy helmet. So we do recommend a climbing helmet. Again, you can rent these from the mountain shop, I think for about $5, $10. The other part that we want to highlight with that is know how to use this stuff. That is every bit as important as having it, and that's knowing how to walk with your crampons, knowing how to ascend up and descend down, and how to walk without getting snagged on them, and also how to self-arrest with your ice axe. And that kind of goes outside the scope of this presentation. We're just going to say that you need to know this stuff. There's a lot of great tutorials available online that you can use to research it, and then we encourage you to go out and practice this stuff on your own. So some other optional technical gear, if you prefer, you can take a second ice tool as well. It's certainly helpful, again, especially in the earlier season. And if you think that you or your teammates might prefer to rope up and protect some of the sections, and if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. We're going to talk a little bit more about it later. Obviously, you would need the harness, the rope, and pickets or ice screws to go along with that. If you're an avid backcountry skier and you wish to skin or splitboard your way up to the top, absolutely. It's a great time. A lot of people might choose just to skin to the top of Palmer and leave their equipment there. That's pretty safe to do. You don't want to set it right in the resort, especially if the Palmer lift is operating, but there's a variety of places that you can stash it just up above that upper Palmer lift house. If you want to, you can carry it up to the Devil's Kitchen or all the way to the summit, whatever your preference is, but certainly that's an option. Hiking poles are great. I use them all the time. You know, a lot of people also use them. Some people, you know, they prefer not to, but yeah, I do recommend them, especially when you're climbing that much elevation. And they do have help for the descent too, to help stabilize your descent, because that terrain can be really uneven. Backpack size. What kind of backpack should you be looking for? Usually 20 to 40 liters is a pretty good size. If it's like a skiing pack or a day hiking pack, those are great options. You don't necessarily have to go out and buy something fancy. You also don't want to be taking your JanSport backpack from school, because maybe it's not quite built to carry that heavy of equipment. And the one other thing that a lot of people really like to bring is something to sit on, because you're going to be taking a lot of breaks and you don't necessarily want to be sitting on the cold, hard snow or ice. So if you can have a small foam pad, a Z-Lite pad, something like that, yeah, absolutely bring one of those along. So your 10 essentials, these are the things that you might hear recommended for any kind of hiking scenario, and they're just as important here because this is a backcountry area, and it's a winter backcountry area where, you know, you do have the potential to get delayed or lost, and you want to be prepared if things go wrong. We're going to talk a little bit more about navigation in a minute, but just know that as one of the 10 essentials, a navigation device is first and foremost. Many of the rescues that we go on could have been completely avoided had the individuals had a navigation device and knew how to use it. A headlamp with extra batteries. When you're climbing Mount Hood, most likely you're going to be starting in the dark, so that's going to be absolutely important. But don't forget, this is going to be a long climb. It's going to take a long time, so you're going to want to bring sunglasses and sun protection as well, because you might be starting at 1 o'clock in the morning, but you're going to be done at, you know, noon or 1 o'clock, and being up there in that hot sun and on top of the snow, yeah, you tend to get sunburned really quickly. First aid. I think primarily the things that you want to be prepared for is general inflammation and pain relief. I always have ibuprofen along. I use it a lot just as things are starting to swell, especially people's feet like to swell up in their boots a lot. So a little bit of that I think is really helpful. Blister care is another thing. If you're climbing in boots that you haven't worn a lot before, that you've rented. It's not uncommon to get blisters, just despite however good the fit might be. So bring something along to help you deal with that. Small abrasion if you fall and scrape a knuckle on snow or ice, and tiny cuts, things of that nature. Gear repair. So if you're bringing skis or snowboard along, make sure you have something to handle anything that might break there. A little bit extra cord in case you need to tie something to a backpack, and duct tape is always helpful. Fire starter is one of the 10 essentials. You're not going to be starting any fires up here because there is no trees. But if you do want to bring a stove along, just in case you need something warm to drink, a member of your team gets really cold, that's a great idea. A lot of people do that, so don't feel like you're coming too prepared. Shelter, a great thing to bring along is a small tarp or one of those silver Mylar emergency blankets. I always climb with one. They've come in handy more than a few times. If you happen to get delayed for some reason, or should someone get hurt, they are absolutely, absolutely necessary. So food, water, and clothing. We're going to talk more about clothing here in a second. Food and water, and we tend to get a lot of questions around this. And I think my biggest piece of advice is don't rely just on energy gels and chews and things like that. Those are great for short bursts, but typically this is something that you need. People prefer some real food that'll sustain them over 6, 8, 10 hours. So things that don't freeze are great. Sandwiches of most types are really good. Dried fruits, nut mixes. A good mix of salty and sweet is important. If you just bring sweet sugary snacks or sweet sandwiches, that tends to get old pretty fast, and at some point you're just craving some salt. So try and find a little bit of a mix. Extra water. How much water should I bring? Again, this varies. Everyone's a little bit different, but I think 2 to 3 liters is a pretty good starting point. You might need a little more, you might need a little less. But one piece of advice I'd give is drink a lot of water before you start, and that tends to work pretty well for me. A lot of people will fight with the frozen Camelback hose. You can bring as much water as you want, but if you can't get it out of the bladder, it doesn't do you any good. So if you do choose to bring one of the hiking bladders with the over-the-shoulder bite valve, make sure to take good care of that. Tuck it in your jacket when you're not using it, or get one of those little insulated tubes, and make sure to blow it out to keep it from freezing, because once it gets frozen, it's really, really hard to get it unfrozen. And yeah, extra clothes. So clothing. Layering here is very important because you're going to be moving, you're going to be resting, you're going to be going from warm to hot to really cold, and you want to make sure that whatever you're wearing can adapt to that. So a base layer of some sort, synthetic or wool, not cotton, not your cotton t-shirt. A mid layer, what is that? I mean, it's something like what I'm wearing now. It's, if you can, it's like a fleece jacket or something that gives you a little bit of a light insulation that you can move in without getting super hot and sweaty. It's also tends to get very windy up there, so be prepared for that. You want something that will cut down on the wind, whether it's a soft shell jacket or your ski jacket, or a rain jacket, something of that nature is great. When you don't, it's not really for warmth, it's just to help cut down, keep that wind from cutting through. And insulating, so you want a good down or synthetic jacket. Insulating jacket is great too for those times that you're going to rest, or maybe up towards the summit when it's getting a lot cooler. Gloves, again, there's a lot of different options for gloves. Just be aware that you should have a couple of different kinds. You should have something that's a little bit cooler that you can move in, and something for up towards the top when it's colder. However, you're going to want to be able to handle your ice axe, and so you probably don't want to be climbing in mittens the whole time. Mittens are great to put on for a stop, or if you're moving very slowly, but just make sure you have a couple different options. Again, for your first couple times until you get comfortable with your equipment, I do recommend bringing extra socks. If you get maybe a blister that's just not working, or you get your your socks get wet and they get sweaty, it's really nice to have an extra pair along. So I think that's well worth the wait. And again, if you're wearing those climbing helmets, there's not a lot of insulation to them. So if you don't have a hooded jacket that will fit underneath, bringing a nice thin beanie to fit underneath that is great, because again, up top high on the summit, it's really cold. So having that little bit extra insulation goes a long way. I didn't cover pants here. Pants, It depends, but typically you're going to be in a good pair of hiking soft shell pants. You don't need, your full Gore-Tex ski pants because it shouldn't be raining up there, and you're just going to get hot and sweaty in those. I usually also don't recommend bringing insulated pants because you tend to overheat because, again, you're moving or should be moving pretty consistently the whole time. So yeah, thin pair of hiking soft shells, maybe with long johns underneath if it's a lot colder, would be recommended. So another question we get a lot is fitness and timing. How fit should I be? How long should this take? Let's first look at to try and give you an idea of how long it might take. And for a first-time climber, usually people are going to want to leave sometime between 11 p.m. or 2 a.m. that morning from the Timberline Lodge. And again, this is just for a single-day itinerary. You can certainly break this up into a 2-day trip. A lot of people choose to do that as well. And if you have any questions about timing for that, feel free to ask us. But what we're talking about now is really just for a single-day trip. So starting somewhere between 11, 2 o'clock in the morning, depending on the weather, depending on conditions, depending on your party. But that's a good estimate. Summit time, people are usually shooting the summit sometime between 7 and 10 a.m. Could be a little earlier, could be a little bit later. But we would think if you're looking at summiting around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that should maybe draw caution to your plan because there's hazards with being up there that late in the day in the springtime and in the early summer. We'd usually recommend descending down from the summit by 11 a.m. Again, if you think that you're going to be up on the summit at 2 or 3 o'clock, that's probably a little late, and you should think about that plan and what some of the dangers are getting down at that time with ice and rock falls now been sitting in the sun for a long time. And when it's been sitting in the sun for a long time, things start to detach and they'll fall. So your risk goes up, and that's why we recommend getting down from the summit before things get that hot. Also be prepared, the walk down takes a long time. You can see the parking lot the entire way, but it never seems like it's getting any closer. Your ski descent, it goes pretty fast, but if you're walking down from the summit, be prepared to take 3 or 4 hours. It's certainly not uncommon. And it's a lot of really steep stepping downhill. It's not super comfortable to walk with, and you're tired, so it takes longer than you expect. Timing wise, as you're going up, again, these are just general benchmarks. They're going to change with everyone. They're going to change for your parties. But so we discussed earlier that Upper Palmer Lift House. That's the highest point of the ski area. 2 hours up to there is a good benchmark. A little bit longer, 3 hours, that's fine too. If it's taking you 4 hours to get to the top of Palmer and you feel pretty exhausted, then you might want to consider if you do have the right fitness for this, or if it's the right day for you, because maybe there's something else going on too. People have certainly done it that way, but again, these are just general benchmarks. From there, another 2 to 3 hours up to the Hog's Back, and that was that area where a lot of those photos were taken from earlier. And then another hour or two from the summit. And so again, as you're traveling, if you kept some of those timing marks in mind, and you could see, if you're kind of about average, a little above, a little below, but again, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. So this isn't necessarily a right or wrong way, it's just a general benchmark. Overnight trips, again, something totally different. What are some good training hikes and climbs? Mount Defiance in the Gorge is a great one just to get your legs working and get comfortable with maybe walking in the boots. So if you want to get a feel for the boots that you're thinking about renting or buying, Mount Defiance is a great place to test those out with a heavy pack. You get a lot of elevation gain in a short period of time. Getting comfortable with some steep snow, walking with crampons on, walking with ice axes on. Mount Helens, St. Helens is a great starting point. It's a pretty moderate snow slope. There's a lot of areas to practice self-arresting, and it's a beautiful hike that we have great access to. South Sister as well is pretty similar. If you're looking for a bigger hike and something that's kind of just one step below Mount Hood, Mount Adams is the perfect place for that. The Southside route over there, that's something that we will cover in another info session, and I think we also have last year's info session is posted up and recorded on the Mountain Shops YouTube channel, so check that out if you're interested in Mount Adams. But again, this is a great place. You climb about 6,000 vertical feet, so it's very similar to the Mount Hood climb. And also, just as a training hike, the Palmer Snowfield is great. You know, if you're really unsure as to whether or not you're prepared for this, grab your gear and go ahead and walk up the Palmer on a day and just see how you feel. There's no better place to test yourself than there. Just a few other miscellaneous tips before we move on to some of the routes and the hazards. Pacing is a big thing that we see a lot of first-time climbers struggling with. Set a steady pace. If you're sprinting and then panting, you're going way too fast. It should feel like you're walking too slow, but you're going to be doing it for a very long time. So don't overheat yourself. Don't get sweaty. Don't wear yourself out in the first little bit. This is a marathon. Eat and drink regularly. Don't wait until, a lot of people say don't wait until you bonk, until you feel tired, until you feel irritable. That happens a lot. So eat little bits here and there. So get ahead of it. Everybody poops. Know what the blue bags are and know what to do with them and how to pack it out. We don't like finding human poop or any poop on the mountain, so make sure you're responsible for that. The blue bags are usually available in the climbers register at Mount Hood, where you check in and get the permits. If they're not there, I know there's also a variety of products available at Mountain Shop. Also, you might see a skin track, and this is the uphill track that skiers who are climbing would leave. If you can, it's considered good etiquette to avoid walking in that because it just makes it easier for everyone. And again, if you're looking to ski down, usually you'll aim your summit time a few hours later than people are hoping walking down, because if you try and ski down at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be really icy and crusty, and it's not going to make for an enjoyable ski. So if you want to ski down, we'd usually recommend descending sometime after 10, 11 o'clock when things have had a chance to soften up for a little while. But again, that's going to depend on the day. So we talked a little bit about GPS navigation a minute ago, and again, this is something that's really important. Believe it or not, your cell phone is an incredible navigation tool. There's 3 apps that within the unit we rely on a lot and that are really accessible. They all have free versions that you can use. So Gaia GPS, CalTopo, and Avenza. We're not going to go into how to use them here because it's a huge topic that takes more time than we have. But again, there's great tutorials available online for all of those apps. Check those out, know how to use them. Don't wait until you're standing in the Palmer Snowfield, not sure which way to go at 2 o'clock in the morning to open it up and say, try and figure out where to go from there. Practice it at home, practice it in the gorge, practice it somewhere, but know how to use them. The handheld GPSs are great too. Not to take away anything from the cell phone, they're both super reliable. Some of them have a 2-way communication function, so you can hit an SOS button and you can actually send a text message back and forth to the rescuers. Now, we're pretty lucky to have cell phone service on most of the areas, alpine areas in Mount Hood, just because there is so much population around. But if you find yourself in a more backcountry area, those 2-way communicators become a lot more popular. You can also navigate with a GPS watch. A lot of the newer GPS watches are perfectly capable, have a working compass. That's great for this. So if you're familiar with that from maybe running or hiking or something else, yeah, that would work here too. Also map and compass, and particularly just the compass. One of the dangers that we're going to talk about later is descending in a whiteout in Mount Hood, and having a compass there when nothing else would work is incredibly beneficial. But the most important takeaway here, have a primary device, know how to use it, have a backup device, and know how to use it. There's a link down there on the bottom right-hand side of the screen about loading tracks and waypoints onto the map. So go ahead, take a moment to copy down that link. And again, this is going to be available later. But if you're looking for a GPX track, not just for the Mount Hood Southside routes, but any of the Mount Hood routes, as well as hundreds of other climbing routes in the area, this is a fantastic resource. So feel free to check that out and use those routes. So a little bit about some of the hazards that are unique to the Southside routes. And we're going to take a moment to talk about each of these in more details, but there's a variety of cracks and holes that a person could fall into. There's avalanches, there's cornices, falling ice and rocks, your fellow climbers, and the weather. These are all things that make these high alpine areas inherently dangerous and unique, and that's why we're having this talk. So the fumaroles, this is something that as the glaciers are starting to melt out have become more and more problematic. We, had someone fall into one of them earlier this spring, and before that it's happened in the past as well. So Mount Hood is an active volcano. It's an area that is where these volcanic gases will seep up and out through the surface, and generally those gases are warm, and so they'll melt the snow around this area and create hollow chambers and tunnels underneath the snowpack. And some of these gases are absolutely toxic. It depends on which gases, and there's certain gases that are more prevalent in different areas. Again, we're not going to go into that here, but we do want to be aware of these two particular areas. And so the two primary areas from the south side route. So again, our point of reference is kind of this Hogsback area here. And this photo was taken a little bit later in the year. As you can tell, things are a lot more melted out than they are typically in the springtime. So this area on the right here is what we would refer to as the hot rocks. And that's one fumarole, and you can see where the snow is sort of pulled away from the rock area. This is where those gases would typically escape up out from. Earlier in the season, this might all look like it's covered in snow, but there could be a very thin snow bridge here at the bottom that people have fallen through. It's also particularly dangerous because if you do fall out of the old chute route, you would wind up directly in this area. And again, that's happened a few times. So be very cautious of it. Now, if you're doing that lower old chute traverse that we talked about to avoid the overhead hazard from the rocks on the rime, you can see a line here where people are traversing very close into what we would call crater rock here. So if you do that traverse, avoid kind of the shallowest part of the snow bowl and stay a little bit further back than that. This area to the left here is what we would refer to as Devil's Kitchen. So again, when you first come up, Timberline Lodge is out here in the distance, and when you would first come up from the south side route, you would wind up somewhere in this area. So Devil's Kitchen is another area where a fumarole starts to break through. And I think, yeah, so this is, again, the Hogsback is in the upper part of the photo here. The main Devil's Kitchen area is standing right behind you, and a person actually fell through this hole. The hole wasn't there before they were there. It just looked like a flat covered over spot. And one of the clues that this wasn't the greatest place to standing was how sunken in it was. You can see how everything here kind of funnels into the middle, and they unluckily wound up right in that nice little flat spot that the depression left. But this was the thinnest spot, and once they were there for a little bit, they just broke through. Luckily, we were able to get this person out, or her climbing partners were able to get her out pretty quickly. But keep in mind, is we talked about how these fumaroles can kind of form tunnels and crevasses, or tunnels and holes where the gases are trying to escape. The exposed rock is all the way over on the right side there. It's maybe 20-30 yards away. So just because you're not standing by the rock doesn't mean you're not in any danger. You really do have to be paying attention to the snow and what it might be trying to tell you. The Bergschrund. So you might hear a lot of people talking about the Bergschrund, and this is something that becomes more problematic in the later spring as it starts to open up. This is basically a crevasse that forms in the middle of the Hogsback in more or less the same spot every year. And basically the mountain is kind of pulling away from itself, and so this crack starts to form in the hill. And the crack we're talking about is this kind of right to the left of that person who's standing there in the photo. This is a little bit better shot there, and as you can see, the Bergschrund is this line in the snow right across kind of through the center of the Hogsback there. So typically in the photos that we showed earlier, the climbers would ascend all the way up the Hogsback and then cut pretty close left here to get up to the pearly gates. But as you can see now, that boot track they left in the snow has to go all the way wide out right to miss the Bergschrund. So When it's open this wide, the things we want to keep in mind is make sure you give the end of it a pretty wide berth. Just because you can't see, just because it looks like the crack is bridged over, doesn't mean it is. That bridge could only be a few inches thick or a foot thick, and it might not be enough to support your weight. Or maybe it supported the weight of the person in front of you, but it's not going to support you. So don't trust it. If you see a crack like this, give it a wide berth. And this is looking down on top of that bergstrom. You can see the upper lip of it below the climbers there, and you can see how they're kind of going out and around to avoid it. So avalanches, we talked about avalanches just briefly earlier. Again, avalanches are mostly outside the scope of this presentation. So if you're interested in learning more about them, seek out qualified instruction from some of our professional avalanche providers in the area. But a couple things that we do want to make you aware of is you are more at risk of being in an avalanche or causing an avalanche when you're on a very steep snow slope and it's getting soft and mushy and there's direct sunlight on it. If you look around and you can see little bits of snow starting to slide and little balls of snow going down the hill, it's probably a good time to get out of there. So pay attention to what's going on around you. If it seems like things are soft or unstable, then there's a good chance they are. Also, make sure to check out the avalanche forecast. It doesn't particularly apply to the Devil's Kitchen and Crater Rock area, but we would recommend that if it's the forecast for the day is a high or considerable or extreme danger, simply not climbing if you're unsure. If you're going for a winter ascent, beacon shovel probe is always recommended because there is certainly avalanche terrain that you'd be traveling through, and yeah, avalanches have absolutely occurred on the climbing routes. And so this slide here, you can see that it came pretty quickly out of the old chute area. And we'll step back just for a second and pause it just so we can get a better look at it. So the old chute climbing route is up above here. And you can see the crown of the avalanche right here. So again, later in the springtime, soft slushy snow, just be aware of this stuff. Okay. All right, cornice hazards. So there's two places where we're primarily concerned about cornices. To give you a spot of reference in this picture, the hog's back that we've been talking about is way up here. So down here, we're actually closer to, say, the same elevation of the top of the Palmer Lift House, or the top of the Timberline ski area. So the White River Glacier is on your right-hand side as you're walking up. If you were to venture too far right, you would start to enter this area here. And the real danger is you can't see these cornices from above when you're walking out towards them. And if you were to stand on top of one of these, it's very possible that they could break off and take you down with them and bury you. So again, navigation is a huge help and would easily mitigate this as you start to get off track. So know how to navigate, know how to use it, and you won't have to worry about this. The other area that we see cornices, and they're especially dangerous, is along the summit rim. So this is a picture from the summit. Now the true summit where people usually congregate, you can see a group of people out there in the distance. That's the true summit. This is closer to the top of the old chute climbing route. And what we're trying to illustrate here is the cornices that have formed on this side of the ridge that are hard to see. So as people would be climbing up from the right-hand side of the picture, you don't know how big these cornices are and how much they're actually undercut. So you can see the boot track here is giving the edge a wide berth, and they're maybe 10 or 20 feet in from the edge of those cornices. And again, we'd recommend don't get anywhere close to the edge. People have fallen over there. People have stood on the cornices or gotten too close and they've broken off and fell down. There was an incident somewhat recently of a gentleman who was standing on the top of Mount St. Helens, and he was about 10 feet away from the edge, and the cornice he was standing on broke off, and that was it. So again, be very, very cautious. Don't approach the edge. So we've mentioned a couple times about the hazards of falling rock and ice. This is primarily something that we're concerned about on hot sunny days. So pay attention if, you know, you'll hear ice and rock and things, and you'll see it starting to move around you. But when it's getting really hot, you know, and you're down to your t-shirt, this is when this is the most dangerous. So again, just pay attention to your surroundings. If you see things starting to move, and you're planning on still going up to the summit, this is a good time to reconsider that plan. This is what some of that rime looks like up close. You can see how it's kind of long and feathery. And once a little piece of it breaks off, it kind of creates this cascading effect, and a lot more of it starts coming down. Just to kind of illustrate, you know, when we're talking about rime ice, what that actually looks like and why it's so dangerous, because a little piece could just start this avalanche, and all of a sudden you get these bigger pieces that are breaking off and can be pretty hazardous when they're falling from high up above you. So one more thing to keep in mind now, when the Timberline Resort is operating, you must go on the right side boundary of the Timberline ski area. They do not like climbers walking up through the ski area, and we want to respect their rules because we want to make sure that we have a good relationship with them, and you know, they continue to let us use their parking lots, and they actually will groom the hiking trails sometimes. So please respect that rule. When the resort is not in operation, people will walk up closer to the lift towers. That's okay then if the lift isn't operating and if they're not doing cat skiing at the moment. But try not to walk directly underneath the lift towers. As you can see here, there's a brief moment where all the ice suddenly and catastrophically cascades off the lift towers, and it's kind of a chain reaction that can occur from top to bottom. It's pretty cool to watch from a safe distance, but if you're below it, those are very heavy chunks of ice that are going to be coming down on top of you, so make sure to avoid this. Other people, so Mount Hood is the most climbed mountain in North America. You will see a lot of your counterparts up there. This is one of the primary hazards that we have to deal with. What we can really say about this is make sure to give space and be patient with your other climbers. Everyone has the same goal, but everyone has all sorts of different skill levels and comfort levels, so make sure to respect that. Be very wary about traversing above or below other people. Make sure that everyone's aware of where people are. If you happen to be coming down, you know, make sure people know where you're moving or where you intend to move, especially if you're real close to each other. This is a busy day on the Hog's Back. This is what it looks like on a typical spring weekend. It's not uncommon to see 50 or more people on the climbing route. So this is a picture from the Hog's Back looking up towards the pearly gates. You can see there's a large grouping of people up there. Generally try and stay kind of to the side of someone who's directly above you, so that if they were to slip, they're not going to slip directly down onto you. This is now looking down to the pearly gates, and you can see there's also a traffic jam of people up here too. This is very common, and a lot of people get impatient or frustrated with this. Just know that it happens all the time. There's really not a lot that can be done with it. So again, be patient, be courteous, be aware of the people who are below you. A big thing that'll help here is know the alternate routes. So if you plan on going up Old Chute, also be aware of what the other routes look like, or vice versa. If you plan on going up the pearly gates, know where the Old Chute is, know how to get to it, know how steep it is. So if there is a large traffic jam like this, or for some reason you're unable to get down it or to get up it, you can change your plans. And weather is a huge problem on Mount Hood. It can change very quickly. The high mountain weather conditions can be very extreme. Don't just count on what the forecast is at Timberline. Try and use some of the resources we're going to talk about in a minute to see what the weather might be like at the summit. It's usually anywhere from 20 to 30 degrees colder, and the winds are usually at least 20 to 30 miles an hour higher at the summit than they are at Timberline. Again, make sure you have navigation. If you get into a storm and you get into a whiteout, you can't see anything. The photo on the left here is taken from the Hog's Back. On a clear day, you could see all those same images that we've been looking at throughout the slideshow. Here, you have no idea where you are. You have no idea what's below you or above you. So again, navigation, navigation, navigation. One of the hazards with descending in that whiteout, and this is one of our most frequent callouts that we get, is people will descend the fall line approach. And what we mean by that, and we're going back to the illustrated photo we used earlier, is if you're descending down out of the crater and you were to take the fall line, which is the path that a ball would take if you dropped a ball, that ball would not roll straight down here through the Palmer snowfield to the lodge. It would actually roll over towards the Zigzag Glacier, and that is an area that ends in a series of cliffs and terrain traps and valleys, and takes you very far away from the lodge and very far away from where you want to be. So you constantly have to be moving a little bit to the left to actually get back down to Timberline Lodge. If you have a compass, on your phone, if you have a magnetic compass or a compass on your watch, you want to be heading due south. If you take nothing else away from that, just remember that if you head due south from the crater, you should wind up back at the lodge. And again, this is a photo taken from above the Hog's Back near the Crater Rock area there. And that fall line we were talking about, again, it heads down into this series of cliffs and valleys here. And it's very, very difficult to navigate your way out of. And it's very high consequence terrain. There's a lot of avalanches here. There's a lot of potential to get lost and hurt. So again, those are the two most common accidents there, is people who descend too far out, and also people who would fall out of Old Chute or the crater, into those fumarole areas. So what to do if an accident does happen? Call 911 right away. Now, accident not in, you cut your finger, or maybe you hurt your wrist a little bit, and it's something you think you could handle within your party. But if there's an accident, a serious fall, someone is exhibiting symptoms and they're not sure how to deal with, or even if you're not sure, just call 911. Don't wait, do it right away. It happens all the time where we get called off and told, go back home, the person is okay. We'd much rather that than someone waits too long to call 911. We're not able to help them out. Assess the scene safety. So something happens and everyone up there wants to help, but make sure that you're not putting yourself in any more danger. If you see someone fall into a fumarole, do not approach it. These are very dangerous areas that we have a very specialized protocol, and only certain people are actually qualified to enter these areas. They require gas respirators and monitors just to make sure that you don't also become a victim. Be aware of secondary avalanches and rockfall. So if an avalanche does occur, if someone gets hit by rockfall, be aware that there could be another avalanche and there could be more rocks coming down. So if you're trying to help that person, you're in the line of fire there, and it's something to be very wary of. If you can get to the person safely and they are injured, one of the best things you can do is just keep them comfortable, keep them warm. So don't wait until they start to get cold, because they're going to start to lose body heat very fast, especially if they're not able to move. Give them any extra jackets, any extra shells you have. If you have a foam pad or a tarp, try and insulate it from the ground and wrap them up as best you can. And in general, just follow the instructions from 911. They'll help you out too. Just so you know, it takes a very long time for us to get up there. Most of us live in Portland or surrounding areas. So the timeline, we have it there. But it's probably from the time that 911 call comes in to the time we're actually able to get up to the crater could be anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. So if you do call and say you're lost somewhere, make sure you stay put, but also be patient. We are coming. If we said we're going to get there, we're going to get there, but it could take a long time. So complexity is one thing that as we start to get into other routes, the rescues get a lot more complex. But just on the south side, again, usually we can get to you within 4 or 6 hours. But as we start to talk about the other routes, it could be significantly longer than that if we're able to get to you at all. So as you start to take on these bigger objectives, just be aware that that can certainly change. And we talked briefly about roping up, and we're going to talk more about it here in a minute. This is something that some parties choose to do on the south side routes. Just know that there's reasons to and reasons not to rope up. And this is something that you're going to have to work out in your party, and everyone's going to have to decide for themselves depending on their own comfort level. Just a couple key things to keep in mind is if you are roping up, make sure that you're placing protection along the way. If you're not placing protection all the way, you wind up in what we call a death pact. And basically what happens is, say you have two climbers who are higher up on the hill, they don't have any protection in, meaning there's nothing to stop them from falling, despite them being roped together. If one person falls, both people are going to fall. And so now they're tied together. And the real danger then comes in is if there's any climbers below them, they can very easily get caught up in that rope or get caught by the other climbers. And now all of a sudden, an accident that maybe unroped would have only impacted one climber now impacts 4 or more climbers. So these things can escalate really quickly, and there has been accidents that have happened like that. So again, it's a decision you have to talk about closely with your teammates and decide if it's right for you, but roping up doesn't always make it safer. Couple resources here. Things that we like to use a lot is our Facebook page, and not just the PMR Facebook page that will periodically update with trip reports, but also there's a couple other Facebook groups in the areas that people will also provide condition updates. So if you're wondering if the routes are in good shape, what they look like to get a feel for the conditions, a lot of options out there on Facebook. So we have a couple of those links. Cascade Climbers is a forum that gets used a lot, and not just for the Southside route, but for some of the other routes on Mount Hood. Timberline Lodge has a number of webcams available. You can see exactly what the weather is looking like at the moment. A couple different weather resources. NWAC is great for the avalanche forecast. I mentioned earlier about making sure you're not looking at just the weather at Timberline Lodge, but also the weather at elevation. I recommend Mountain Forecast for that. It'll give you a couple different options to view the elevation and see how the temperature is changing and see how the winds are changing at those elevations. So that's a great resource. And just for general weather conditions, NOAA is what most of us rely on, usually among the most accurate, and you can also get it for different elevations as well. So we're going to take a minute to look at the chat. Matt, any other questions? Anything else we wanted to go through in the chat?
Yeah, maybe one thing you want to talk about, since you are more of a skier than me, but how high do you skin and where do you like to ski from? There were a lot of questions about this, actually.
Okay, yeah, it depends. It depends on the conditions. There has been times where you can skin almost to the top of the Hog's Back, almost to the beginning of kind of the old shoe climbing route. And there's been times where it's hard to skin to the top of the Palmer lift. So it depends. There isn't a great way to answer it, but usually people will stop skinning at the top of Palmer if conditions are at all variable. That's the end of the groomed runs, that's the end of the resort. And so after that, it tends to get icier, it tends to get more variable. So if you're not a confident skier, we'd recommend stopping there and carrying your skis up above, or just leaving your skis there.
One other question from the chat that I thought was really good was when to put on crampons. Maybe I'll give my opinion.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think very occasionally it is maybe possible to climb Hood without crampons, but for me, I just always put mine on. If I haven't already put them on in Devil's Kitchen, I'll put them on there, because if I'm climbing, say, the Pearly Gates and suddenly it becomes super icy, I don't want to have to stop there to put them on. So I would say I always put mine on in Devil's Kitchen, or maybe the latest, like on the Hog's Back.
Yeah, yep. There's certainly times where people have been more comfortable even putting them on after Palmer. It can just be a sheet of ice after that. So it is very condition dependent, but kind of at your own comfort level.
Let's see, we also have a question from Nick Maslin. Can you speak to the snow changes with elevation? Maybe this just kind of relates to the previous questions about the skiing. So I went up into the crater yesterday, and for me, like, I was able to skin up on my skis to the top of Palmer. It was fairly relatively normal snow. And then above the top of Palmer, it was just all ice, all rime. So maybe this answers your question. Let me know if it doesn't. Yeah, expect the snow conditions to change as you ascend or descend. And yeah, just know that you might have to change from, say, skis to crampons or whatever.
Or even back to skis. Yeah, the conditions on the high mountain are known for just being all over the place, and it's really hard to predict what it's going to be like from one storm to the next. That, you know, because storms are usually the driving factor when things change. So you just be prepared to handle varying conditions.
Also, I'll just answer 2 other questions since we're doing this now rather than typing. There's a question about glissading. I think in the spring, sometimes people glissade, certainly compared to, say, Mount Adams, where there's always kind of like the big glissade chute. Mount Hood doesn't really get something like that, at least in my experience. I think there's usually so much ice, it's just really unpleasant. So people don't really do it.
Yeah, there's short sections that you can just glissade, but don't plan on being able to do most of it. Another question I saw about boots, Scarpa Fuegos specifically. It's hard to comment on that. If you're unsure, again, talk to the experts at Mountain Shop. They're the gearheads. They know this stuff really well. If you're not sure about your boots, you can rent another pair there. Climbing season is, yeah, I think we touched on it briefly, but typically the climbing season for the Southside routes is going to be November through June. It depends a little bit on the snowpack and how things quick are melting out. But that's, yeah, approximately November through June. And people, another question, people will down climb the pearly gates. Not really advised to walk down. No, people will down climb a short section. Again, this all changes with personal comfort level, but yeah, down climb.
There's another question. How do you choose whether to go at the pearly gates or the old chute, or is it just personal preference? Yeah, I think it's just personal preference. In the sort of typical spring climbing season, when there's a lot of snow sort of piled against the pearly gates, they're about the same steepness. So for me, it might just depend on where there are fewer people, or if there is, say, like a lot of like more falling debris on one of the routes, I would choose a different route.
Yeah, and yeah, I talked a little bit about the value of, you know, knowing the different routes and knowing the different options. So if you get up there and for some reason the route you had intended doesn't seem like the best option, you feel comfortable changing plans.
Okay, yeah, lots of questions now, which is good. Is Old Chute a longer climb than the Pearly Gates? So yeah, the Pearly Gates is kind of the most direct way. You basically just follow the Hog's Back straight up through the cliffs. If you do the Old Chute, you will traverse low. Micah talked about the 2 traversing options. So it is more circuitous, but generally not quite as steep, I think, for most of it.
Ben in the chat, would you ever need snowshoes for Mount Hood, technical ones? No, not on the Southside routes. It would be really uncommon to see people making a summit attempt using snowshoes. And again, they're certainly not really going to do you any good above the Palmer lift. You know, usually below that it could be a little bit softer, but most of the time you're going to be walking on the Groom Cat track, and then above that it's typically icier or firmer, or there's a lot of boot steps from people in front of you. So yeah, it'd be pretty rare that snowshoes would be beneficial.
Also, there were a couple questions about the catwalk. Maybe you can go back to your photo of the summit ridge. So yeah, there's one feature if you climb the Old Chute. Okay, yeah, there were also some questions about the Mazama chute and the 1 o'clock couloir. So maybe we can talk about all of these. So this photo is what, just from the top of the Old Chute, basically.
Yeah.
So like this section here that I'm circling, I believe this is the catwalk. So this section can be very narrow. This is a common place, yeah, for people to feel uncomfortable, especially if it's icy. So someone asked if they should set protection here. I've never seen anybody do that. If you were really uncomfortable, I suppose you could. Yeah, in this photo, it looks kind of like snowy, so I bet it feels pretty solid. I think the sort of vertical relief of this arrow that I drew is probably only 2 or 3 feet. So for me, when I go over this, I have to maybe like take a couple of really big steps, or like sort of sit down and put my foot down on the lower section. But it's not really like technical climbing. So I've never seen anybody protect this. Micah, maybe you have a different answer.
No.
I guess I'll also say people kind of get in their heads about this section. I was really nervous. I remember the first time I climbed Mount Hood, I had read about the catwalk. I was really nervous. We went down the old chute. I had no idea what to expect. And then we kind of walked over it. And afterwards, we realized like, oh, that must have been the catwalk. So it just didn't really seem like a big deal for me at the time.
Yeah. I think the catwalk is a little overgrown, but again, the biggest danger here is not getting too close to the edge, and just being careful.
Let's see. Someone's asking about the Y East route. We will discuss the other routes in a few minutes. Let's see. Couple more questions. Will there be natural two-way traffic as people are ascending and descending? Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And we had a couple photos in there. There's traffic jams at some point. You'll have to wait for people to get out of the way. So yes, lots of two-way traffic. And ideal place to drop ski and splitboard gears at Hogsback. That's certainly an option. A lot of people do that. A lot of people drop at the top of Palmer. Some people drop at Midway. Some people drop it at Devil's Kitchen. Again, it depends. And I would recommend just base it off your own comfort level and pay attention to what you're walking up. And if you're walking up something that you wouldn't be comfortable skiing, don't carry your gear any further than that. All right.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'll take a 3-minute break, and then we'll get started on the next section where we'll cover some other routes and other concerns.
I feel like we need the like running dog that NWAC has for the ticking down timer. I did see there were a lot of questions about avalanche awareness and just like avalanche questions in general. I'm going to plug another Mountain Chop event. This one is free. It's put on by NWAC, but Mountain Chop is hosting it on Thursday, March 11th. So a week from this Thursday. It's on our Facebook page. It's on our website and everything. And it's free. They're super informative. And they'll kind of go into a little more details about where to look for avalanche forecasts, how to understand them, and that kind of stuff. And like Matt and Micah said, the forecasts don't go to the summit. They go above tree line, near tree line, and below tree line. And that kind of goes up above tree line to about 7,000 feet. So what's in the crater could be totally different from what's in the forecast, but lots of good things to be aware of. So those are risks with going above tree line. Yeah, so far, good job, guys. It's going great. Lots of great engagement and questions from the audience as well.
I'll say one quick thing during the break. Someone asked about climbing in August. For me, I would not climb in August. basically as all the snow and ice melts, then we get all this exposed rock, and the rock is very, very fragile and it will just fall off. So August, you're going to see like really deep runnels where all the rocks have been falling down. Yeah, should probably be avoided in my opinion. Okay, maybe we'll get started. So now we're going to talk about some of the other routes. I'm going to emphasize a lot sort of the other skills and other hazards that are present on the rest of the mountain. So all of the routes besides the south side, they probably have some additional technical gear that is required, like ice tools, certainly a second ice tool in addition to your ice axe. You're also probably going to want a harness and a rope and ways to set protection, such as pickets and ice screws. And with all this gear, of course, we need to know how to use it. So there are going to be some required technical skills as well, like knowing how to travel on a glacier, how to perform crevasse rescue, possibly building anchors, belaying, rappelling. All right, so here we have sort of some of the other hazards that I thought were maybe more important or amplified on the other routes. On the left, we have the objective hazards, avalanche risk. There's generally, in my opinion, more avalanche risk on sort of the non-south side routes. There's also more risk of falling debris. There's also, yeah, some challenges just with the climbing itself. If you find yourself doing any sort of technical climbing, it's often challenging. There's usually not very good protection. Also, if there is a rescue on any other side of the mountain, it's probably going to be a lot more complex than our sort of standard south side rescue. Then on the right, of course, there are a lot of subjective hazards of climbing the other routes. They're going to be longer. They're going to be more difficult. They're going to require more skills. All right, so let's just talk about avalanches again. Many routes on Mount Hood have significant avalanche danger on or above the technical sections. Yeah, seek qualified training. This photo is from Leuthold's Couloir, sort of looking down. So it's a little hard to see. Maybe tilt your screen, but there's this huge path of avalanche debris here, and these people are all walking on it. Here's another photo. This is a recent photo from NWAC. These are the North Face gullies over here on the right. This is Cooper Spur on the left, and you can see this big crown all across the face. So this whole area probably slid, or definitely slid. Okay, yeah, another hazard on the other routes. I think personally, this is a thing that really scares me. We have lots of falling debris on Mount Hood, like falling ice that comes off for whatever reason, or falling rocks. And most of the moderate routes on Mount Hood are sort of shaped like funnels. So there's always going to be some part on the route where you are at the most narrow part of the funnel, and you're exposed to all of this falling stuff from above. So this photo is from the Reed Headwall, and I chose this just to show this kind of bizarre looking ice formation. It looks cool, but who knows how stable that really is. So any climb that has sort of this funnel shape, they're going to become more risky, of course, with avalanche hazard. Avalanche hazard, like fresh rime ice that's likely to fall off, or old rime ice that's rotten and likely to fall off. They'll also be more risky with warm temperatures and sun that melts the ice, wind that can just blow the ice off. If you see lots of exposed rock, then I'm always afraid of rock fall. Also, if there's multiple parties climbing any sort of route like this, there's additional hazard from whatever debris they knock down. So here we have a picture of the reed head wall again, and this is just to show, yeah, to me the really scary thing is this area that I'm circling. So you'll notice that sort of above this, everything is going to funnel into this one little area. And if you're just climbing up from below, you might not realize that the terrain is really shaped like this. But yeah, I think any falling ice or any avalanche that happened up here is going to get funneled through this little narrow slot. So for me, one reason this sort of scares me is that I think this problem, all these problems can sort of combine and compound to make worse problems. So I wrote over here, for example, if you are climbing sort of at your limit, and you come to this section and you decide you need to protect it or move super slowly or something, you're putting yourself at risk for a much longer period of time to this big terrain trap above you. So this is a thing to be aware of. Let's see if my video will play. This is just sort of an example of the funneling effect. In this case, it's just spin drift, thankfully. But here's someone climbing on the north face in just like this continuous river of spin drift that's coming down the face. Not very pleasant. Okay, some commonly climbed other routes on the mountain. We sort of divided these into two sections. Half of the routes kind of just like steeper snow glacier travel. So these are routes like Lootholds Couloir, Y East, Sunshine Route, Cooper Spur. Then there's other routes that people are mainly pursuing in order to do ice climbing. So these would be like Devil's Kitchen Headwall, the Reed Headwall, the North Face Gullies. And we're going to go over, I think we have a brief overview of each one of these. And I made like a very in-depth sort of overview of Lootholds Couloir and of Devil's Kitchen Headwall. So we're going to talk about those two sort of more specifically, mainly just to sort of go over like the most important things in my mind to be thinking about when you're doing these climbs. Also, we will plug the Mooley book, Mount Hood Climber's Guide. All right, let's talk about Lootholds Couloir. This is the green route 9. So you can see the sort of normal south side routes up here at the top. Lootholds Couloir. We're going to approach from Timberline. We're going to start from Timberline again and go up the south side. Then when we get to the top of the ski area, we're going to go left and get to Illumination Saddle, which is the flat spot by Illumination Rock, and traverse down and across and then up. So this feature over here is the most narrow part. This is called the Hourglass, maybe 40 to 50 degree steep snow. Then you reach the Queen's Chair. Eventually is this very flat spot at the top, and you top out sort of on the crater rim near the top of the old chute. I saw there was a question about a Bergschrund. So yeah, this route, another big hazard on almost all these other routes is going to be glacier travel. There's going to be more glacier travel. So the Reed Glacier, people typically rope up to cross this. There is there is a Bergschrund. I think it just goes all the way across this entire sort of lower part of this face. In this photo, it's not visible, it's covered. And the Reed Headwall, this is going to be sort of a steeper route, basically on the same aspect of the mountain. So these are the red lines. There are lots of variations on the Reed. Same thing, approach from Timberline to Illumination Rock, traverse down. In these little narrow constrictions on the Reed Headwall, there's going to be probably some ice climbing. I've done it where there hasn't really been any ice climbing. And then I've also heard stories of people climbing very steep ice on the Reed Headwall. So it's pretty variable. Most parties will belay some sections carrying maybe pickets and ice screws. And if you climb the Reed Headwall, if you sort of stick to the left, always go to the left, you reach like this highest part of the summit ridge by the old chute. If you go right instead, then you sort of come out on the west crater rim, and then you can go up the old chute or traverse to the Hog's Back. Okay, here's a photo from Luthold's Couloir. This is looking down. This is right above. This is right above the hourglass. So this shows kind of the steepness. Okay, some unique hazards from Luthold's Couloir, and I think this applies to the Reed headwall as well. This area is very avalanche prone. I think almost every time there's a big storm, there are avalanches on the Reed headwall. There was a rescue last year, Memorial Day. 2 people triggered an avalanche in Luthold's and were swept down the route onto the glacier. I triggered a small avalanche on the Reed, very small. Yeah, so the wind on Mount Hood usually blows from the west to the east. So I guess traditionally we would be thinking of the east side as being like the side that gets really wind loaded. But I think the Reed headwall, this whole area is just so steep that there's always snow just piling up over here. So even if the avalanche hazard is green, you know, like we've said, the forecast doesn't really apply. But yeah, I've seen avalanches occur here when it's green. So that just kind of emphasizes the forecast doesn't apply, and this is an area where you have to be really careful. Okay, yeah, another hazard on Luthold's that we've already talked about, but this idea that the debris from up high can sort of funnel down. So the hourglass feature on Luthold's, right? You are subjected to any falling debris from like this large part of the upper mountain. And sort of same with the Reed, all these little funnels are going to, or all these big areas are going to funnel into the little small sections. We already talked about the glacier crossing and also very complex rescues. Yeah, compared to the south side, on the south side of Mount Hood, it's usually fairly straightforward. For a rescue to be performed, we are mainly lowering the subject. But if someone is injured down here, right, it immediately becomes a lot more complicated because then we also have to deal with the glacier travel aspect, and we have to find a way to raise them back up to illumination saddle. Okay, yeah, here's a photo from the Memorial Day rescue last year. It's hard to see, but if you move your head or tilt your screen, you can see this huge avalanche path at the bottom of the screen. I'll stop moving the mouse. And the little specks at the bottom, sort of bottom left, those are people, including the 2 people who were kind of swept down the route in this avalanche. Okay, another sort of strange hazard on Luthold's Couloir is the route finding. So many people have accidentally climbed the Reed headwall when they have been meaning to climb Luthold's. And okay, I put this trip report here. It was a little bit humorous. I redacted any personal information, but this person said, yeah, planned on doing Luthold, but that didn't work out. That just means they climbed the Reed accidentally. Would have been nice to have brought another tool. So this is just an example, right? Lots of people, they try to do Luthold's and they do not traverse far enough. They just kind of go up too early and they end up in more technical terrain, right? Everything on the Reed is sort of steeper and more technical than Luthold's. And there was also a rescue before Micah and I were in PMR, but some people, they accidentally climbed this blue dashed line up onto Yoakum Ridge. So this is another possible route finding error. Okay, maybe I'll pause for one minute and see if there's any questions just on Reed.
We're doing pretty good on the questions.
Doing good on the questions. Okay, let's go on. We'll talk about Devil's Kitchen Headwall Variation 1. So Devil's Kitchen refers to the fumarole, like Micah talked about. And Devil's Kitchen Headwall sort of refers to this whole area of cliffs. I will draw on the screen. This is all Devil's Kitchen Headwall. Then at some point it becomes the feature called steel cliffs. Nobody really knows where the line is between steel cliffs and Devil's Kitchen headwall. As far as I know, it's all kind of the same cliff. So when you talk about climbing Devil's Kitchen headwall, usually we're talking about these 4 routes labeled 4A through 4D in this photo. And the most popular, I think, is variation 1, which is kind of the leftmost variation. So to do this, you would climb, just follow the south side route into the crater, and then you go up this big cleft in the cliffs. And inside of this, you would expect to find maybe 1 to 2 rope lengths of ice climbing. Above that, sort of here, it becomes sort of moderate snow climbing to the summit. Here's just a photo from, basically from the Devil's Kitchen fumarole. So when we're talking about climbing Devil's Kitchen variation 1, we are talking about climbing this sort of line. It goes up and you can't really see, but it goes behind this and then out. Basically this red line is variation 1. This line over here is variation 2. It does seem like I've encountered some people who have had route finding issues here as well, where they climb one of these and they think they've climbed the other, or they're not really sure. So yeah, I'd recommend looking at all the photos in the book are really good. There are these other gullies like this thing, which is a lot harder to climb. Okay, moving on. So this is a photo of the crux, like the hardest section of Devil's Kitchen head wall, variation 1. Obviously, this is like belayed climbing with protection. In this photo, we see, I think, pretty good quality ice. This looks like normal ice climbing, like you might find in, you know, Hyalite or Colorado or something. Here's another photo where maybe the ice is less good, and we'll use this to sort of start talking about the unique hazards of Devil's Kitchen head wall variation 1. So of course, this route is also a big funnel. If I go back to, yeah, maybe this slide, you can see there's this huge sort of rimey buttress above it. Anything that falls off of that is probably going to get funneled into this really narrow line. There's that, and then also if we're doing like belayed climbing, any sort of climbing where we're not directly next to each other, whoever's in front is going to be knocking stuff off, and this route is extremely narrow. In my opinion, one thing that makes this route in particular kind of scary is that it's really difficult to tell what the crux is like from below. So this thing that I circled, this is the crux. And this photo is taken from partway up the route. And even from here, it's really impossible to tell if this is like good ice, or maybe it's not really ice. Maybe there's just some snow kind of plastered onto the rock. So for me, this is the scary thing about this route. You can try to look at this from the crater. You can usually tell if it's just bare rock, and then you should probably not climb it. But it can be hard to tell if it's good quality ice or not. Of course, another hazard here, if something were to go wrong, the rescue would be pretty complicated. This has never happened, at least to my knowledge. Okay, yeah, here's just another photo from sort of different conditions, showing kind of, in a way, the normal climbing in these routes can be kind of weird in the sense that maybe over here on the right, it looks like there's kind of like powdery snow. There could be deep snow. Then over here, there's maybe good quality ice. Up here, there's rime ice, and then there's a rock right here. So like in a 20 square foot section, we could encounter sort of every conceivable set of conditions just in these little areas. So it's really variable. And of course, this means placing protection and building anchors is really challenging. Okay, Doesn't seem like we have any questions on Devil's Kitchen. All right, we'll just do a quick overview of a few of the other routes. And then I have some more information about sort of technical climbing on Mount Hood. So we'll talk about the Y East route. This is route 1 in this photo. Again, the normal south side approach is going to be this thing on the left side. So the Y East route, this is just the name for when you sort of go up onto the east rim of the crater. It's a little hard to tell from this photo if you're not totally familiar, but yeah, there's this big cliff here, right? The shadow of this cliff, and the cliff continues all the way. So this is the Steel Cliffs / Devil's Kitchen head wall feature. So the Y East route is kind of just the easiest way to get up onto this ridge. So to climb this, you would go up the south side, and then at some point you have to traverse the White River Glacier. Of course, now this is more glacier travel, so that's going to be a hazard here. There's also this falling debris hazard from anything on the Steel Cliffs south face that falls off. This book shows a couple ways to do this. Personally, I usually try to cross on this sort of ridge in this photo, which I think is at 9,200 feet. This is what I would do. Okay, so if you were to get over here somehow and follow the line number 1 up to the top, you just kind of follow this to the summit. There is one slope in here that I don't think we have a photo of in this presentation. It says exposed traverse, maybe 50-degree snow up in here.
That should be on the next slide.
Oh, all right. You can tell Micah made this slide. Ah, yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, so this is looking at the east crater rim from the east. So this is just the east side of the mountain. So you can see the various Devil's Kitchen routes are sort of popping out onto the crater rim along here. And then the regular Y East route is just coming up this way. This exposed traverse section is right here. And yeah, this can be sort of scary. It can be like just deep, unconsolidated snow, kind of impossible to protect. I believe there's another way past this as well that people do, where they traverse under this and then they go up this snow chute, which is apparently fine. I've never done it. Okay, so this is the Y East route. All right, we'll talk real quick about Cooper Spur and the Sunshine route. So these are 2 routes on the north side of the mountain. Cooper Spur is just this big ridge, 16. It sort of comes from the upper mountain and turns into this giant moraine on the east side of the Elliott Glacier. So if you've done any hiking from Cloud Cap, that's down here. If you've been to Cloud Cap, you've probably walked up this moraine some of the way. So, okay, Cooper Spur, we would be climbing just kind of the easiest line up this slope. Probably sustained 45 to 50-degree snow. And the Sunshine route, in a way, well, yeah, not very similar actually. We're just going up so this ridge on the other side. So the Sunshine route is basically on glacier for the entire time. This is going to require more glacier navigation skills. Most of these routes on the north side, if people climb these, they leave one car at Cooper Spur, and then they leave a car at Timberline. Then they drive to Cooper Spur, and they climb up one of these, and then they descend the south side to get their car back, or to get to the first car. They take that to the second car. Descending these routes, it's certainly possible. It doesn't, yeah, it's not appealing to me. Some people do it. Okay, here's sort of a close-up of the Sunshine route. You can see there's some pretty serious glacial features in here. Off to the left, there's sort of this whole like ice fall area. There's this other ice fall area underneath the Sunshine route. If you climb this, you're kind of trying to stick on the easiest terrain. There are these two rocks that stick out of the glacier, Horseshoe Rock, and the other one down here, forget what that's called, maybe Micah knows. Anderson Rock. This is Anderson Rock lower. This is Horseshoe Rock. So you'll sort of stick in line with the rocks and figure out which side to bypass them on. Okay, here's a close-up of Cooper Spur, sort of showing how steep it is. And we'll talk really quickly about the North Face gullies as well. So I think this is kind of, I don't know, lots of people think this is like the most desirable technical climb on the mountain. The two gullies are these lines here, the left gully and the right gully. So to climb these, generally the same. People will leave their car at Cloud Cap and walk up the glacier. Yeah, I keep saying that. People will leave a car at Timberline and drive their second car to Cloud Cap, and then they'll descend the south side. So these routes, they're both going to have sort of two mandatory pitches of ice climbing. There's always this Bergschrund, which can be very difficult, and then there's sort of a lower pitch of ice climbing on this cliff band and an upper pitch of ice climbing on the upper cliff band, and then pretty steep snow in between, maybe 50 degrees. Okay, are there any questions on like specific routes? We have a few more slides on some other stuff, but I'll pause for a second. Any particular question? Okay, I see one. Can you comment on Flying Buttress relative to Devil's Kitchen head wall variation 1? Yes. Okay, let me go back. So yeah, Flying Buttress is going to be, yeah, the labeling is a little confusing. So Devil's Kitchen head wall variation 1 is this thing on the left. So I usually just think of them like 1, 2, 3, 4. I think, yeah, Flying Buttress and East Crater Wall are both fairly not steep most of the time. They're not that steep. So all of these routes, particularly these ones on the east side, so like these three, I think these get blasted by the wind pretty directly. So there can be like really huge rime formations in here. And the difficulty of the routes can depend a lot on just how the rime has formed. So Devil's Kitchen, yeah, Flying Buttress, I down climbed it twice yesterday. So right now it's pretty easy in my opinion. But there's also times when I would probably not climb it because there's just too much like rime poking out everywhere. Okay, someone says, biggest challenge of Cooper Spur. I have not climbed Cooper Spur. Micah, have you climbed Cooper Spur?
I have. I think the biggest challenge there is navigating the steep snow. It's very sustained and it has a very kind of airy and exposed feeling. So it can be a little spooky, even though it's really not any steeper than the sections of the old chute. And also navigating those rock bands that you see there. A couple people have asked when the best time to climb it is. It's really any time that you can get through those rock bands before they get too melted out and before rockfall really starts to become a hazard. That's going to depend, year to year. It's going to vary, but generally we're saying March to May, somewhere in that time frame. So if it is more exposed and you have to actually climb on some of that rock, it can be very brittle or loose and detached, and you have to be very careful about
that. Let's see. So a couple more questions. Okay, one question about the glacier travel. Yeah, so I said that something involving glacier travel was just more difficult. The thing that makes it more difficult, of course, is just that it is a glacier, so I probably want to be roped with whoever I'm with. And then we have that whole sort of rope management issue on top of everything else. Let's see, some other questions. Someone asked about Is there black spider beta in the book? Yes, the book actually has a very good photo of the black spider. Okay, would you consider Y East, Cooper Spur, Sunshine, all of similar difficulty? Is Luthold Kulwa slightly more difficult?
Yeah, I think they're generally around the same. They each have their own challenges. Some might be a little bit longer. They might involve a more involved descent. But for what a lot of people have been asking this question in the chat, they're all pretty similar. So, you know, recommending doing the research on the routes and see which one appeals to you the most, because certain people might have a preference for a particular route.
Okay, we have a few more slides. So these all relate to sort of if we find ourselves doing any technical climbing. And of course, if this is a thing that you want to do, you should really seek qualified instruction from a guide. That's my disclaimer. And yeah, also a lot of this just sort of ties into like other hazards with this sort of more technical climbing. So here's the thing I just mentioned, managing the rope. We already sort of talked about this relating to the south side. This is like one of the classic sort of problems on the south side is that people rope up because it's glacier travel, and then they don't take their rope off on the steep stuff. And so then when they fall, they all fall together. So here's a photo from the north face, and you can sort of see how this problem is going to manifest. Obviously, in this photo, this person is on a glacier. This is the Bergschrund. So we want to be roped together here in case something unexpectedly collapses or we punch through. But then as soon as we get above this, it looks really steep. So I think just all this sort of technical climbing on Hood, it can induce these sort of rope management errors. This is something you have to think about really carefully. In this case, yeah, we climbed this and then we unroped because we thought that was the end of the glacier. Okay, here's a quiz. It's auto playing. All right, the question was supposed to be, what are the 3 types of ice in these photos? So there are 3 very different types of ice being shown here. So on the left, we have rime ice. This is frozen clouds or just precipitation that sort of freezes directly on the cliffs. In the middle, we have water ice. So this is like normal ice climbing like you would find in, you know, Highlight. These are waterfalls that might freeze, or just like some little bit of water that seeps out of the cliff and freezes, or even if there's a patch of snow and it melts and it trickles down and freezes, that could create something like this. So you have rime ice, water ice, and of course this photo on the right is in a glacier, which I just said it was very old snow, like hundreds of years old maybe. Okay, so yeah, one big challenge of technical climbing on Mount Hood is that the rime ice is kind of everywhere and you can't really trust it. You should not usually put your ice screws in here if this is a thing that you do. This photo shows kind of normal ice climbing. We don't really, yeah, I don't have a strong opinion of any sort on this glacial ice because it's usually buried in the winter. So you kind of have to look for this kind of stuff. So the big takeaway message here is just the rime ice is not protectable in the traditional sense. And so this probably seems pretty obvious. Hopefully this seems pretty obvious. But then we get situations like this. So this is a photo from Devil's Kitchen Variation 1. And in this photo, it's really not clear to me what we're climbing on. Certainly all of this kind of white stuff is rime ice, frozen clouds. But then there is this kind of clear ice underneath that is maybe better ice. It's hard to say. So basically the take home lesson from this is that if you try to do any technical climbing on Mount Hood, the protection is really unreliable. because there's just this low quality ice kind of everywhere. And this can turn something that should be pretty easy into something that's actually really scary. And I think this is one of the many reasons we shouldn't really like push our climbing grade on alpine routes. So that, yeah, I think this is an important thing. I'll just say now, you know, if you buy the guidebook and you look at the guidebook, it's going to have all these routes, and basically they're all going to say the grade is Alpine Ice 3. And then, you know, if you are already an ice climber, and maybe you'll think like, oh, I climbed some Water Ice 3 in Bozeman or Colorado or whatever, and it was pretty straightforward. The ice climbing on Hood could be really scary in comparison. So you want to be really solid on the grade of whatever you're climbing. Okay, another challenge climbing on Hood, sort of similar. Yeah, this is all just kind of cautionary information. If you do any sort of steep climbing, the anchors are usually pretty bad. And I think the reason for this is that most of the steep stuff on Hood, there's kind of like a bowl right above it. So yeah, here's a photo of like some pretty solid, good, protectable ice on the left. And then here's a photo on the right, the bowl above this, which was just unconsolidated snow. So very difficult to build any sort of meaningful anchor here. So this is another reason to be really conservative. And like, yeah, I think even, you know, normally we might think if we're following a route, it would be okay to maybe weight the rope or something. But in a case like this, even if you're following, right, I really don't want to fall and test all this stuff. Okay, here's some other photos of just some questionable anchors. Yeah. Okay. Well, we have 10 minutes, so we can take any more questions now. We also have a few photos, so I was thinking, yeah, we can just look at a couple of the photos and sort of discuss what hazards are present. Okay, here's one question. Would you take 2 ice tools for Cooper Spur or an axe and a second tool? Micah, what do you think?
I would say if you're unsure about it, take both, because again, it's not the steepness of the slope that really, it's not that steep, but there is a lot of exposure. And so the second tool will make you feel a lot more secure. So if you're unsure, probably 2. And again, I want to clarify, you know, we said 2 ice tools. You're going to be better having a longer shafted axe, something that you can plunge down into snow and get a secure grip on. You don't necessarily need technical tools because it's not technical climbing, it's just deep snow. So an axe and a tool is great. Yeah, axe and a tool. Or if you have like a hybrid tool, like a SwimTech or something like that, those are fantastic.
Okay, there's a question to show the last photo again. Okay, yeah, so these are just some very bad anchors. On the left, we have a buried ice tool, a Spectre, and 2 cams that are all equalized. And on the right, we have 2 ice tools that are equalized. One of them was hammered into a crack. So again, the point of this is just to show that sometimes like this is all you have to work with. This is one reason why you should just be very, very cautious if you're doing any sort of technical climbing on Mount Hood. Okay, let's look at a few photos for the remaining 10 minutes. I don't know, everyone can, you know, type concerns in the chat. We can discuss just like the hazards. Yeah, the point is to discuss the hazards that we should be thinking about. Okay, so how about this guy? We'll see if anyone wants to volunteer anything, and then I'll say what I think. Okay, someone says Rhyme City. Yeah, Okay, good. So this is just pure rime ice. So obviously this is going to be difficult to protect. Probably your ice screws are not going to do anything here. Okay, yeah, good questions in the chat. Okay, yeah, I think the main takeaway from this was just that it's rime and it's hard to protect. Someone says, what happens if he falls? There is a picket in this blob. He's in the process of clipping a picket driven all the way into the rime. So we can hope that the picket will hold. Okay, how about this photo? What are the hazards? What do we need to be thinking about? Someone says brittle rime ice. Yeah, I think there's a few clues that it's brittle, like these really long sort of daggery type things. Icicle, I guess that's the word for it. These long icicles look really fragile. Okay, so yeah, my concern in this photo is the fragile rime ice. Also, this is kind of a gully, so anything that falls off is probably gonna, yeah, it might get funneled towards the climbers. But yeah, to me, the main thing that pokes out is the icicles. Maybe makes it seem like the rime is new, not particularly stable. How about this? I guess is kind of the same. I think the concerns here, well, actually, there's a lot. We have a lot of fragile looking rime ice, maybe even overhead hazard from this rime ice. This is, you know, possibly protectable, but I think it's kind of impossible to know. Looks like maybe there's good ice down to the left. Maybe not. There's exposed rock, so you have to be concerned about rock fall. The sun is hitting this thing up here, which means probably it's going to start shedding rime as well. So yeah, I think a lot of concerning things in this photo. Okay, any thoughts on the hazards? To me, there's sort of three big things to be concerned about with what's going on here.
So real quick, we'll hop back to a question. What's the stability of rime compared to snow? So again, it's the brittle, feathery, flaky stuff that you really need to be worried about. You can tap that with your finger and it's going to pop right off. And there's other bigger, thicker rime bollards that you can rappel off of. So like everything else, it depends, and it's something that you really need to be able to judge for yourself.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think the rime, it can be really fragile or it can be really solid. So a great thing about a route like, say, Devil's Kitchen Headwall 1 is that when you sort of get up into the gully, there's rime right there. So before you have to like climb on it, you can test it a lot, like swing your ice tools at it, right? And like kick it and like see how solid it is. And maybe that gives you some useful data for the rest of the climb. Sometimes I've gone up there. The last time I tried to go up there, I sort of tapped it with my ice tool and I broke off a huge chunk, like a microwave sized chunk, just with a very light tap. And so I thought, okay, obviously this doesn't even hold my body weight. I probably shouldn't go up there. Okay, yeah, a bunch of people here are saying hazards. There's so much exposed rock, and also the sun is shining directly on the rock. So yeah, rock fall must be like a huge thing on your mind in this situation. Also, I think this ice looks pretty thin. Yes, someone guessed the route. This is the Frick Amos route. Okay, how about hazards here? Yeah, okay, the obvious one, crevasses. There's a lot of them. I think one thing that scares me too is like these rocks. All these kind of rocks on the glacier, you know, you have to wonder, where did those come from? Did they fall way over here and then roll down? And if we go up this, is that a thing that we need to be concerned about? So yeah, crevasses, rocks on the glacier. This looks pretty late season. Yeah, someone says like hard ice. Yeah, this glacier looks pretty dry. There's not much snow on it. So it could be very slick. Someone says bowling alley. Yeah, maybe the rocks. And of course, up here, someone's saying that the Serox could fall. Okay. I think we have time for one or two more. How about this?
So I'll chime in. I mean, the one thing I noticed is, you know, you can see the sun hitting the upper parts of the slope there. So yeah, we've talked about funnels a lot in this, but particularly here because now you might be down, you know, you're cold, you're in the shade where you're at, but there's a lot of stuff above you already in the sun and maybe it's been warming for an hour or more. So particularly, you know, be aware that things are changing above you a lot faster.
Yeah, I think, I guess giving this presentation, it sounds like I'm just afraid of everything, which is probably true. But yeah, this scares me. Just the sun shining on this piece of rime, because to go up this, yeah, we have to go up this kind of gully here. So obviously we're in a funnel. A bunch of people said funnel in the chat. Yeah, I think we're recognizing the key things. Also here, you know, okay, that looks a little weird. Maybe that's like very thin water ice on top of some rocks, I believe. Yeah, okay, someone just said the floor looks very thin. Someone is saying stay right. Yeah, I don't recall what, I feel like there's kind of a little ridge here. I'm not exactly sure. This is from somewhere on the read head wall. All right, how about one more? I picked this photo because I thought this was a fairly recent time where I sort of mismanaged some things. Someone says no pro, don't fall. So there is an ice screw there in the glacial ice. So for me, I thought the challenge here was, yeah, this is very steep. We were just on the glacier down here with all the open crevasses. There's probably more open crevasses here. So of course we want to stay roped up, but then this is pretty steep. So we want to protect it. Yeah, an additional thing, I was kicking off lots of ice here on my partner. This is a difficult place to manage. If I had to do this again, I would build like a real anchor and belay him up, like without any simul climbing. Someone says would not send. Looks hairy. Okay, I think that's it. So thanks everyone for attending. We hope that there was some useful information. Of course, we can take any more questions if you have them on anything. Thanks to Liz and the Mountain Shop for having us.
Yeah, guys, this was awesome. I feel like the meat of the best part, the highlight, was like the last 10 minutes going through what could go wrong. It's always the best part. I mean, maybe not the best part, but the most interesting part. No good story ever started with a salad, right? Okay.
Real quick, we just had one question and we'll plug ourselves. What's it take to join PMR? We actually are opening up a training class this year. If you're interested in joining PMR, you can go on our website, on our Facebook page, find out more information there about what that application process looks like. So yeah, now's the perfect time to take a look if you're interested.
Someone's asking for the guidebook. There's the photo of the cover. Yeah, this is the most up-to-date book on hood.
Mhm.
There's
And we
also
do
the
have it. We have several copies at the Mountain Shop. So if anyone's looking to add it to their collection, to plug the Mountain Shop. Also for rentals as well, if you're not ready to invest in the gear, it's super expensive. We do offer it at like a pretty affordable rate for crampons, ice axe, and the guys at the shop will help you get outfit to make sure that the crampons fit your boots correctly, or if you need boots, we rent those as well. That your ice axe is appropriately sized for what you're trying to do, or if you want to try out some different ice tools, we do offer demos of ice tools. So different people have different preferences on which ice tools they like to use. Anything else, you guys?
what route would you suggest after the south side route?
Yeah, this came up a couple of times in the chat. I think generally, you know, Y East, Lutholds, Cooper Spur, Sunshine are all similar and they all have slight differences. So I'd suggest getting the guidebook, doing the research on the route, see which one appeals to you the most and making a decision from there.
Yeah, okay, someone was also saying Jeff Thomas's book is pretty good. I think you're referring to Oregon High, the older book, is very useful. I don't think it's in print anymore, unfortunately.
I don't think so either.
How do you say that Sunshine and Cooper Spur compare technically? Yeah, they're kind of similar in terms of steepness, as Micah just said. Sunshine has a lot more glacier travel. Cooper Spur has no glacier travel, so that's one difference. There's a question about using cams for pro. You won't ever have to do it unless you're doing some kind of weird stuff. And all the rocks probably move, so.
If anyone has follow-up, good way for people to get in contact with you guys.
Sorry, what was that?
If any people have follow-up questions or they think of things later, is there a good way for them to get in contact with you guys?
Yeah.
Instagram, just send you a message on Instagram.
I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay, you can send me, I can also send, I'm gonna send a follow-up email to everyone. So I can include, I can just CC you guys on the email.
And I know for myself and Matt, we're both somewhat active on Facebook, so you can probably get us a message on there too.
Perfect. Cool. Any final words? Anything last? Anything else?
Just we've had a bunch of questions on this. Yes, this is being recorded. It will be available on the Mountain Shop's YouTube and PMR's YouTube as well. So check it out there.
Yes. I will send a follow-up email once it is uploaded so that you guys all have the link to it. In that email, I'll also try to include some of the links that Micah and Matt referenced in their PowerPoint, the name of the book, and then any other pertinent information that I can think of to include in that email. So it'll be packed full of information, send that out within the next couple days. And yeah, thank you guys both so much for taking an evening to go in depth about a plethora of climbing routes on Mount Hood, as well as some of the hazards to be aware of. Those are things that people don't necessarily think of when they're going to try something new. And so just keeping an eye out and being aware is a great step in the right direction. And thanks for everyone in the audience for joining us and for being active participants. This was super great. Hopefully this webinar inspires you to go learn more and expand your mountaineering knowledge and tackle some of these less traveled routes. And hopefully the webinar was informative as well. And yeah, that's all I've got. Any last words, Matt, Micah?
No, just
thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks again for joining us.